I did a video a few weeks ago that I know it wasn't one of the more popular ones I've done, but it needed to be done nonetheless, and that was asking the question, are theaters actually dying? Because when I went back and looked at what, some out there bragging about how, well, this is one of the best summers that theaters have seen in quite a while. Granted, we had the COVID years in there. I get it. But they're talking about, wow, we haven't had a $4 billion summer since this year or that year. It's almost as big as 2013. Of course, no consideration for inflation adjustments. And that was part of the problem, was that the numbers that they were putting out there didn't seem to want to take into account the fact that ticket prices have accelerated tremendously since then. And when you actually look at the butts in seats that places like AMC Theaters reports on their quarterly earnings, it's down a lot. And I mean, so that means that, yeah, there's a lot fewer people paying higher ticket prices, so the pure dollar looks the same or similar to what we saw in big years past. But it doesn't take into account that there's 30 to 40% or more fewer people showing up to actually generate those dollars, which means theaters are also selling 30 to 40% fewer concessions, which is where their highest profit margin is. Not gross dollars, that's not where they make their most money, but that's where they make their highest margins.
You mean sodas don't actually have a product cost of $7?
No.
There's a margin there?
It's about 70 cents.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's good money
The
then.
profit margin for theaters on concessions, folks, their costs compared to what they sell them to you for is about 10 to 15%.
No wonder they get angry when I bring a 64-ounce Buc-ee's container in there. No wonder.
Yeah, that usually.
Hey, but honestly, 3 movies out there that I think are creating a trend now that we need to look at. Think about these 3 films. We rated these very high. I reviewed them. You reviewed them. We both loved them.
Mm-hmm.
They both fit into a similar mold, and yet they are both underperforming, or well, all 3 are underperforming greatly. Take a look at them. John Wick 4.
Yep.
We've got Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning.
Mm-hmm.
Equalizer 3. All very masculine films, all about heavy in action, all of them superhero in the style of the 80s and 90s, and all of them failing financially at the box office, despite us going and saying, wow, this is really, really good. Now, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning, I said, that's a 7. I'm a little disappointed. But the other 2 were really good. In fact, John Wick is just flat out a piece of art.
Yep.
And Equalizer 3, I think, is maybe, it's at least in my top 3 movies for the year. Yet none of them have found an ability to resonate with audiences to get them to go to cinemas.
Yeah, and the sequel issues are always kind of a question mark, right? So when we go back and we think about last summer, and we had this gangbusters box office for Top Gun Maverick. Top Gun Maverick was a sequel, quote unquote, but not really so much. I mean, it picked up later on. It's been 30 some odd years. It's a movie that could completely sit by itself. They added in all the elements you needed to know from the first movie with flashbacks and memories of Maverick, with Goose and all this kind of stuff. It worked. It sat by itself. John Wick 4, definitely more niche. There's also the issue of it being an R-rated film. So that does squish audiences a lot more so than had it been PG-13. But if it was PG-13, it really wouldn't be a John Wick film.
Exactly.
But the studio, nonetheless, was happy with the performance. Certainly, they would have been happier had it done maybe another $50 or $100 million, but they were happy with it nonetheless. They've got other series and tie-ins like the Continental that are due out, I believe, pretty soon here. And then you've got follow-up movies, Ballerina with Ana de Armas, I think that will do very, very well. Again, for its genre. When I say it'll do very, very well, I don't mean it's going to do Super Mario Brothers numbers. No. It should do another 300-400 million easily on a very well-controlled cost from that perspective. So I think those will do well. But when you have things like Equalizer 3, I think maybe that's the same kind of problem. I don't really recall. I think I watched the first one years ago. It was good. I don't know if I got really excited about the sequels. Again, not because I thought they looked bad. They just went right by me. But it's one of those things that I definitely want to check out. But the chart I bring up here to make a point is, what are the movies that are the lowest risk to movie studios that usually almost you can set your watch by it will provide the highest return on investment? Hint,
Those
hint.
which
It's
intend to scare you but not scare investors.
Yep, that's it. I mean, that's these kind of movies here. The first movie that in this franchise of The Nun, which was part of a bigger franchise with The Conjuring, almost 400 million globally. Worldwide box office now for The Nun II is at almost 160 million. This thing will make
Budget?
plenty money. I think on this one, if it's like the first one, it's around 20 million, maybe slightly more.
Oh,
So, and again, even if they spent like they did on the first one, reportedly 70 to 80 million in marketing globally, this movie is still just fine.
right. The
Just
ROI is looking great.
Yeah. I mean, this is what, especially companies that produce and distribute these things, these movies have horror films, especially big popular genre horror films like this, have tremendously lucrative shelf lives after they leave the theater. Meaning that they're set out because Lionsgate and Starz, of course, are breaking up, which is, I think, good for the both of them. But even with Starz, they still had secondary and tertiary licensing partnerships with other places, like Netflix, for example. And I'll tell you what, Pro, one of the things, as I mentioned that I've noticed very recently in the last maybe few weeks to months, the amount of Warner Brothers content that is back on Netflix is staggering.
Well, money to be made there.
Yeah.
Netflix is happy to pay, and Warner Brothers is happy to receive.
You don't have to consume all of your own content forever, Disney. How many billions has Disney lost rescinding those contracts with places like Netflix? And I do mean billions. Probably 3 to 4 billion since 2019, since they lost Disney Plus.
Tip of the iceberg in bad financial decisions that Disney has made and continues to make, with no turnaround in sight.
That's just it. I mean, the money's out there for all of these studios, and I'm not just picking on Disney right now. The money is out there for all these studios. They just have to, the wheel is turned, right? We've talked about this many times. Wall Street has gone from an attitude of subscribers at all costs. Kneel at the altar of the almighty subscriber. How many subs you got this month? How many subs you got this quarter? Blah, blah. They don't care about that anymore. And they don't care about it anymore so much that, of course, we saw this week, what did Disney do? After a month or two ago, during the earnings season, they said that we're probably not going to be guiding towards new subscribers anymore. And then, just this past week, they seem to have lowered their overall projections for what they felt.
Not by a little.
No,
good
not by
Lord,
a little.
Good Lord, you talk about a miss.
Yeah. So, but I think, to Disney's credit, they're on the money because Wall Street has turned the corner, fortunately, and they've realized that that's not the most important thing. It's how much money are you making. So to get back to what we have on screen, when you have movies like this from studios that are willing to not consume their own content, license it out, okay? We can take this movie, we can take the whole Conjuring franchise and not put it on a proprietary service. We can spread this out to as many places willing to pay for it. And these movies, for years after they leave the box office, will continue to make tens of millions of dollars. That's what you need.
And this sucker's got 6 weeks of solid run. I mean, this thing will pop again as the closer we get to Halloween. So
yeah, and I think that's the plan. Is they want to make sure this movie stays in theaters through Halloween, so it'll be there 60 days. A good solid 2 months, and then after that they'll rock it back. Of course, there's other things coming out during the month of October that are going to pick that up and reinvigorate the horror franchises. I've said before, I am very much looking forward to Five Nights at Freddy's. Really looking
What do you make of this? What do you make of this 2-to-1 ratio, though, international to domestic? Is that normal for horror films at this point? Are worldwide audiences turning out now like that, or is this unique to The Nun?
I think this is part of the power of the Conjuring franchise. If you go back and look at a lot of the Conjuring films, they've had international box offices that are very, very stout. Matter of fact, in my opinion, I think that if you have a universally appealing, I say universally, let's say globally appealing film, you should have, in theory, roughly 2/3 of your total box coming from overseas. I mean, think about the population, right? Even though you might not pay as much for a ticket here, there, or somewhere else, you have 40 to 50 some odd international markets versus domestic, U.S. and Canada. Granted, that's the big one. And the fact that the U.S. and Canada typically makes up 1/3 to a half of the box office in and of itself already is tremendous. But in this case, I mean, this is about what I would expect. And I think this is a movie that will just continue to enjoy itself. Look, they had 55 million internationally last weekend. They're now up to 102. So in its total first week, or first 10 days, I should say, 102 million internationally. And remember, streaming internationally is not what it is here. There's a lot of people in the U.S., especially for movies like this, that may be more content to sit at home and say, I'll wait 30 days or 2 months or whatever the case. Remember, Hollywood studios are the ones that screwed up and trained audiences to sit at home and wait because they were yanking stuff out of theaters. Versus internationally, things don't always drop everywhere that quickly. And in many cases, at least outside of places like Disney, okay, which has a huge international footprint with Disney Plus. I mean, HBO Max, Peacock, Paramount Plus, they don't have big international footprints at all. They're a drop in the bucket. They're a fraction of a fraction compared to Netflix and Disney Plus with those footprints. So they have to do one of two things. They have to either not stream it internationally, which they don't want to do. What they want to do is the second option, and that is to license the movie out for money, sell it to overseas streaming services. So the international audiences have a different perspective on still wanting to go to theaters to see the things they want to see versus more American audiences are in some cases content just to kind of kick back and say, you know what, I'll wait. Now, I think if The Nun had come out in October instead of September, I think maybe it would have jazzed the domestic box office a little bit harder. I think people here in the U.S.
The Exorcist Believer is going to get a shot at that, so we'll see how that rings true. And also, by the way, this sets up these two things, these two dynamics that you and I are both looking at in terms of older male action flicks. We've got Expendables 4 coming out later this month, I think next weekend. We're going to see if this is 4 for 4 for these films underperforming. And then at the same time, we've got The Exorcist coming out in early October. October 6th, I think, is when The Exorcist Believer comes out. And, this may be another case where the horror films are what are driving people to go to the cinemas. And, then we'll have to sit down and think about what is it that's driving people to horror flicks in such numbers. Exorcist Believer now eyeballing $30 million plus opening.
Yeah.
So that's not too shabby for a horror flick, especially when it goes so far. That's what we're seeing out of that film. I mean, that one looks just, honestly demented, but demented may make money, may make dinero.
And that one had to move up a week thanks to Taylor Swift.
Yes, T Swift bumping out the devil itself.
Wait, no, bumping out the devil itself on Friday the 13th in October.
Oh man, T Swift with the power.
Yeah. So that was like a double whammy. Yeah, they had booked that one early on for obvious reasons. It was like, no, we want Friday the 13th in October. This is when this is coming out. And then Taylor Swift said, "Hey y'all," and The Exorcist was the devil said, "I'm out."
The devil went down to T Swift.
Yeah, pretty much. So, that'll be interesting. You'll have that movie, and then I think I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I can't really predict yet. We're still too far out. The big marketing campaign has not ramped up yet. But I think Five Nights at Freddy's could be the horror film of the year. It has the potential from the standpoint of the power of that franchise. That has a big following. And I know a lot of people in our audience out there with our age demographic, most of you guys and girls out there watching are like my age. You're probably in your 30s, 40s, and 50s. You're in that middle range like I am. I would not know what a Five Nights at Freddy's is but for my 13-year-old son. So, that's the difference. This is a big franchise for the younger audiences. And I think it's going to drive a lot of them to the theaters to go see this. I'm going to be interested to see how that plays out. Will that audience actually step out to go see this in the theater versus waiting for streaming or something else? Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.